The forest rebels and the Alpha's broken crown. The knife was at his throat before he finished breathing. "Give me one reason," Rachel Moonsard said, her voice perfectly calm in the way that only genuinely dangerous people manage, "why I shouldn't open your neck right here and let the forest have you back." The man they called Gray didn't flinch. He didn't beg. He didn't even have the decency to look frightened, which was, frankly, insulting given the circumstances. He simply looked up at her from the frozen ground where she'd pinned him, mud on his face, blood on his collar, and the ghost of something ancient and commanding in his winter-gray eyes, and said, quietly, "Because you already know I'm not your enemy." The knife didn't move. Neither did the pull in her chest. That warm, traitorous, impossible pull that had kept her awake for 3 nights running, and which she had firmly decided to blame on bad stew. Around them, 12 rebels stood in a ring with drawn weapons. The forest breathed behind them, cold and watching. Somewhere above, a raven circled, the 3rd time this week, which even Rachel, who did not believe in omens, was beginning to find annoying. She searched his face for the lie. She was very good at finding lies. She found nothing, which, she thought grimly, is somehow worse. If you want to see if Rachel survives the Alpha's wrath and discover the secret that could burn the entire rebellion to the ground, make sure to like and subscribe to the library for more fated tales. Chapter 1. The Man the Forest Gave Back. 3 days earlier. The morning Gray arrived. Ashfin smelled like wood smoke, old snow, and impending trouble, which was, admittedly, how it smelled most mornings. The forest rebels had made their camp in the network of structures carved into Ashfin's valley walls, old storage tunnels, converted farmhouses, and one particularly ambitious meeting hall that Pip, their 17-year-old engineer, had built largely from salvaged timber and what he described as structural optimism. The hall had not yet collapsed. This was considered a daily miracle and celebrated accordingly. Rachel was reviewing supply manifests when the shout came from the gate. "Commander, something came out of the forest." She was on her feet before the sentence finished. In 3 years of running the rebellion, she had learned that sentences beginning with "something came out of the forest" required immediate and personal attention. The forest did not give things. The forest took. Everyone in Ashfin understood this the way they understood winter, as a fundamental, non-negotiable truth of the world. She pulled on her coat, tucked her knife, and walked to the eastern gate with the measured stride of someone who was not running because running implied alarm, and a commander could not afford to be seen alarmed before coffee. She had not had coffee. This was already a bad omen. The crowd had gathered in a loose, wary half-circle at the gate. In the center, face down in the frost, was a man. He was large, even collapsed, even clearly depleted. The sheer frame of him suggested a history of physical authority. His clothes were shredded and weather-beaten beyond identification, but the cloth beneath the ruin had once been good quality. His hands were scarred in 2 distinct ways, old combat scars on the knuckles and a newer pattern on his forearms, deliberate, silver-edged, the kind that didn't come from fighting. The kind that came from punishment. Nora, their camp healer, crouched beside him and pressed 2 fingers to his neck. "Alive," she announced. "Barely. Hypothermic. Someone carried him wrong through whatever he crossed to get here. Ribs are fractured on the left side." "The forest," said old Tam, who was 63 and had the deeply inconvenient habit of saying obvious things with profound gravity. "Yes, Tam," Rachel said. "The forest. No one survives the forest." "And yet?" She gestured at the body. Tam squinted. "He might be a spirit." "He's bleeding, Tam." "Spirits don't bleed." "Some do. Name one." Tam opened his mouth, found nothing, and closed it. This was most of his conversations with Rachel. She crouched beside the stranger herself, studying him with the focused attention she gave anything she didn't yet understand. The silver scars bothered her most. They were pack markings, deliberately burned away. Erasure. Whoever this man had been, someone powerful had invested considerable resources in making him no one. She should turn him away. She had a policy. She had written the policy herself, in a document that began, "Trust no one arriving with no name, no story, and suspicious confidence. She was very proud of that document. "Bring him inside," she said. Nora blinked. "Your policy is mine to break." She stood. Carefully. Ribs. They carried him to the healer's quarters. He regained semi-consciousness twice, once to reject the assistance of 4 people trying to lift him, which given his condition suggested either tremendous stubbornness or a survival instinct that had long since stopped distinguishing between friend and threat. The second time, briefly, he looked directly at Rachel. Gray eyes. Winter storm gray. He said nothing. Neither did she. He lost consciousness again almost immediately, which she told herself was a relief. He woke on the second morning. Rachel wasn't there. She had approximately 47 other things requiring her attention, including a supply negotiation with a merchant who thought that because she was an Omega woman, he could offer her 60% of market value for black market wolfsbane, and she would be grateful. She had sent him away with a counteroffer and a description of his accounting practices that had made the man go slightly pale. She heard the stranger was awake from Nora, who appeared in the doorway of the command tent with the expression of someone carrying information they weren't sure how to hold. He's awake. Won't give a name. Won't explain how he survived the forest. Will accept broth, but held the bowl himself before I could set it down, which what? Which I don't think was about the broth. Nora paused. He's been scanning the room. Every entry point. Counting heads when people pass the door. Rachel, he moves like what? Nora seemed to wrestle with it. Like someone who's used to being the most dangerous thing in any given room. Rachel set down her pen. And is he? The most dangerous thing in the room. Nora considered this with the honesty that made her an excellent healer. I genuinely don't know. But I thought you should hear it from me before you walked in there and found out yourself. Rachel stood and adjusted her knife, not drawing it, simply checking, a habit she developed after assassination attempt number 2, which had taught her that comfort was a luxury and preparation was survival. She walked to the healer's quarters. He was sitting up against the wall, bowl empty beside him, watching the door. When she entered, his gaze moved to her with the particular quality of someone recalibrating, as if he'd expected someone else, and was rapidly adjusting his expectations. His expression remained neutral. Neutral in the way of someone who had learned to wear neutral-like armor. She pulled up a stool, sat, and looked at him. He looked back. "Name," she said. A pause that was too long and too deliberate to be confusion. "Gray. That's a color. It's what I'm offering. Where did you come from?" "The forest. Before the forest." Another pause. "Somewhere I can't go back to." She studied him. He was better looking than she'd registered in the frost, which was an irritating detail her brain had apparently decided to volunteer without her permission. She set it aside firmly. She had a rebellion to run, and attractive strangers with no names and suspicious silences were not on the agenda. "You have pack markings," she said. "Burned. That's a punishment brand. Someone with authority and silver access erased you." Something moved in his eyes. Gone before she could read it. "Yes," he said. "Who?" "Someone I'll deal with myself. Not if you're in my camp, eating my broth, sleeping in my healer's bed. In my camp, we share information." She leaned forward. "Or we don't share resources." He looked at her then really looked, the way she'd looked at him in the frost. Taking inventory. Reassessing. She had the distinct and uncomfortable feeling that whatever conclusion he reached was more complicated than she wanted it to be. "I'll earn my place," he said finally. "What do you need done?" It was not an answer. It was, however, an offer, and she was short 3 fighters since the Ashvale raid last month. She was also short a trainer. Her rebels were fierce, but undisciplined, brave, but untactical. They fought like people with righteous fury, which was excellent for morale and somewhat catastrophic for survival. She should say no. "Training," she said. "My fighters need someone who knows how to keep them alive." "You look like you know how to keep people alive." "Or get them killed," he said, without inflection. "Depends on the day." She almost smiled. She caught it in time. "Don't get them killed," she said, rising. "That's the whole instruction." She left before the warmth in her chest could arrange itself into something she'd have to name. That night, in the dark of the healer's room, Gray lay awake and stared at the ceiling. George, he reminded himself. Your name is George. You are George Aldrich Vane, Alpha King of Voldemort. You have a crown to reclaim and a brother to dethrone and a very practical reason for not falling into whatever that pull is. The warmth didn't care about practical reasons. He pressed the heel of his hand against his sternum, as if he could physically contain it. An Omega rebel leader. Of all the things the forest could have given him. Of all the things the universe, in its infinite and apparently satirical wisdom, could have arranged. He closed his eyes. The crown was out there, 17 pieces, scattered by Kane's ritual shattering, hidden in locations only a true blood bond king could locate. He needed to find them before Kane discovered they could be reassembled. He needed an army or something close to it. He needed to not be dead, which was more precarious than it sounded. He did not need a mate bond with the woman who led the only force capable of helping him. He did not need her to know who he was. And yet, the bond hummed between them like a plucked string, and strings, once plucked, do not go silent simply because you'd prefer them to. One problem at a time, he told himself. He was asleep within minutes, the deep, training-encoded sleep of a soldier, and if he dreamed of amber eyes and the smell of wood smoke and the particular courage of someone who had built something real from nothing, well, the forest kept its secrets. For now. Chapter 2, The Rebel and the Ghost. Gray became a problem immediately. Not the kind of problem Rachel had anticipated, not dangerous, not duplicitous, not the Kane plant she'd spent his first 3 days half expecting. He was a problem in the more genuinely inconvenient sense. He was good. Astonishingly, infuriatingly good. On his first day training the rebels, she watched from the ridge above the sparring ground as he assessed each fighter in turn with 2 minutes of observation, and then, without apparent effort, dismantled every weakness he'd identified. Not cruelly. Not with the contemptuous efficiency of someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to be untrained. He found each person's strength first, built from it, and then showed them, through demonstration rather than lecture, exactly how to stop dying. Bryn, their best fighter and second most stubborn person in camp, Rachel held first place by unanimous vote, spent the first 20 minutes of training ignoring his corrections on the grounds that she'd survived 4 years without them. She spent the next 10 minutes conceding points with the particular grace of someone who hates being wrong but loves being better. By lunch, she was following his lead with an intensity usually reserved for people she'd known for years. "He's good," said Pip, appearing at Rachel's elbow with the 6th cup of tea he'd brought her this week, which she was beginning to suspect was not entirely about the tea. Said Rachel. "Like, really good. Like, have you noticed how he positions his feet? It's not any standard pack formation I've seen. It's older. Like old. Pip. It's like watching someone who is trained by someone who is trained by someone who." Pip. "Yeah. Go build something." He went. She kept watching. The problem, she understood by day 4, was not that Gray was suspicious. The problem was that he was becoming necessary to the training, to the camp security, to the quiet logistical consultations that began happening naturally when he'd walk past the map room and pause at the door, and she'd gesture him in. And he'd look at a tactical problem for 30 seconds and say something that reordered her entire approach. He never volunteered more than required. He ate with the fighters, but listened more than he spoke. He did camp maintenance without being asked. She came out one morning to find he'd reinforced 3 sections of the perimeter wall, not enough to change its appearance from outside, but enough to triple its actual resistance. He'd done it at night. Alone. Without tools she could identify. "Nora," Rachel said, on day 5. "How worried should I be?" Nora, who was grinding herbs and had the look of someone who'd been waiting for this question, said, "About what specifically?" "Him. The fact that he's capable? Or the fact that you noticed?" Rachel narrowed her eyes. "The first one. Nora kept grinding. "I checked his healing. The ribs are knitting faster than they should, significantly faster. His regeneration is accelerated in a way that's consistent with high alpha genetics." Silence. "High alpha," Rachel said carefully, as in the top tier. Commander level or above. There are no Alpha commanders who aren't either dead or working for Kane. I know, said Nora. And then, with the delicate precision of someone placing a single stone on a very unstable stack, I also know that 3 years ago, the true Alpha King was exiled into the Forbidden Forest and declared dead within a season. The herbs kept grinding. Nora did not look up. You're suggesting, Rachel said, with the tone of someone who is absolutely not going to follow that sentence to its conclusion, something I'm not going to dignify. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm noting facts. His eyes are gray. The Alpha King had gray eyes. Half the men in the western provinces have gray eyes. True. Nora finally looked up. His scars are in the pattern of royal erasure, Rachel. The specific pattern they used on the deposed king. I've seen the archive sketches. The silence this time was longer. If he were the king, Rachel said, each word measured, he would be the man who sat on a throne of gold while Cain burned our communities. While my mother's village was seized. While Omega families lost everything. She paused. He would be exactly the kind of man I built this rebellion against. Yes, said Nora simply. So he's not the king. Of course not, said Nora and returned to her herbs. Rachel went to find Gray. She found him at the forest's edge, which was where, she had noticed, he went when he thought no one was watching. He stood at the tree line with his arms at his sides and his face tilted slightly toward the dark interior, and something in the line of his body was not the posture of a man looking at a forest. It was the posture of a man looking at the place where his life had ended and was not yet sure what had replaced it. She'd seen that posture before. She wore it herself, sometimes, facing north toward the capital. You fix walls in the middle of the night, she said, stopping beside him. Not accusatory. Simply noting. They needed fixing. You could have waited for the morning crew. I was awake. She looked at the forest. He looked at it too. What were you? She asked. Not who, what. The distinction was deliberate, and she felt him register it. A long pause. A man who thought being strong was the same as being wise. And now? Now I'm less sure about both. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her, had been, she suspected, for longer than the conversation warranted. The bond pressed against her ribs like a second heartbeat, low and persistent, and deeply unwelcome. Why are you really here? She asked. He held her gaze. I need an army. The honesty was so sudden and complete it almost knocked her sideways. She'd expected deflection. She'd prepared for deflection. She had absolutely no prepared response for that. For what? She said. To take back something that was taken from me. She studied him. He was not, she noticed, afraid. He was something worse, hopeful. The carefully contained hope of someone who has survived long enough to know exactly what hope costs, and is spending it anyway. You're going after Cain, she said. Something flickered in his expression. Not confirmation, not denial. Recognition, maybe. The look of a man whose plan had just collided with someone else's and was finding the overlap. Aren't you? He said. She almost laughed. Almost. Tell me something true, she said instead. Something real. I don't care if it's small. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I haven't slept a full night in 3 years. Not until I came here. A pause. I don't know what that means. But it's true. The bond flared. Rachel looked back at the forest, jaw set, composure locked. This, she thought furiously, is a complication. Chapter 3. Crowns and Consequences. The raid on Cain's supply convoy was Rachel's idea, and it went beautifully for approximately 11 minutes. 11 minutes of clean precision, the rebels moving through the convoy's blind spots exactly as planned, extraction routes covered, the target supply wagons, carrying both weapons and the land seizure documents they needed to discredit the Ashvale Syndicate's legal claim on 3 Omega villages, identified and isolated. Gray had drilled the strike team for 4 days, and it showed. They moved like a real military unit rather than, as had previously been the case, a collection of very motivated individuals who mostly avoided stabbing each other. Then Minute 12 happened. Minute 12 involved a secondary guard complement that had not appeared in any of their intelligence, suggesting either a leak or an upgrade. Rachel's instinct said upgrade, her stomach said leak, and her entire body said run in the specific language of adrenaline. Fall back, she said into the communication line. East route. East route is cut, said Bryn. They came from the forest side. How did they come from the forest side? Nothing comes from the forest side. Something did. She turned. 30 meters away, Gray had already reoriented, in fact, been in motion before the call came, as if he'd sensed the secondary unit's approach before it was visible, which was not something a regular person's biology permitted. He was directing 3 rebels into a flanking pattern that transformed their retreat from a rout into a tactical withdrawal, and doing it with the particular calm of someone for whom chaos is simply a change of variables. Not a regular commander, some part of her brain filed. A general. Or something above. They got out clean. No casualties. Got 2 of the 3 target wagons. Rachel considered this acceptable, which Pip told her was a very low bar, and she told Pip that surviving was the bar, everything above it was flourishing. They were barely back in camp when Kane's scouts were spotted at the valley's rim. 3 of them. Watching. Then gone. They know we're here, said Bryn, in the command tent that evening. That convoy was too close to our position. Whether they tracked us or had the position already. We need to move within a week, Rachel said. Maybe less. Where? Said Kale, her strategist. We've spent 3 years building this camp. The tunnel network, the stores, can be rebuilt, Rachel said. Bodies can't. She looked around the table. We move north. The Ironwood Shelf, dense enough to make aerial scouting difficult, access points we can control. The Ironwood Shelf is 40 kilometers through the forest, Kale said. He was using his delicate voice, the one he deployed when he thought someone's plan was catastrophically wrong but respected the person too much to say catastrophically wrong directly. Around the forest is 60 kilometers through open road that Kane's patrols own, Rachel said. Through the forest? No one goes through the forest. One person in this camp apparently does, she said. And she looked at Gray. The table looked at Gray. Gray, who had been quiet through the entire exchange, appeared to reach a decision that cost him something. He set his cup down. I can take you through, he said. Silence. How? Said Kale. I know the route. You came out of the forest. That's not the same as. I know the route, he said again, with a finality that was not aggressive but was absolute, and which had the effect of ending that particular argument the way a wall ends a road. Rachel watched him. He didn't look at her. He was looking at the map on the table, and something in his expression was moving, some internal calculation she couldn't fully read, running through variables she couldn't see. It's not safe, he added. But it's survivable. If your people do exactly what I tell them, when I tell them, without asking questions in the middle of it. My people, Rachel said, are excellent at following orders. They're slightly less excellent at following the orders of someone they don't entirely trust. Then trust me, he said. And looked at her. It was the second honest thing he'd said to her. She added it to the first one, held them both in the part of her mind that weighed evidence, and made a decision. We move in 3 days, she said. Gray leads the forest transit. She raised a hand before Kale's visible objection could become words. I'll be with him at the front. If anything goes wrong, it goes wrong to me first. That's good enough. It was barely good enough. They left on a moonless night because moonless nights were tactically sound and also because, Rachel suspected, Gray had requested it in the way he sometimes requested things, not with words, but with a look at the sky and a slight adjustment of posture that the more perceptive members of camp had learned to treat as instruction. The forest received them. There was no other way to describe it. The Thornwall's Edge, which every Ashfin resident had understood since childhood as a place of fundamental wrongness, an itch behind the eyes and a weight in the lungs, that sensation simply stopped when Gray walked through it. Stopped and replaced itself with something different. Not comfort exactly. Not safety. Something older. Something like recognition. As if the forest knew him. Rachel walked directly behind him because she had said she would be at the front if anything went wrong, and because she needed to watch his face. He moved through the dark with the certainty of someone navigating by memory rather than sight, which was impossible and yet observably happening. His path avoided every obvious hazard, every unstable ground section, every place where the ancient tree root networks would have sounded the wrong kind of alarm. He moved through the forest the way a king moves through his own hall. She filed that observation where she'd been filing the others. The collection was getting heavy. Halfway through, they stopped at a clearing for the group to rest. Gray stood at the clearing's center while the rebels settled in exhausted clusters, and Rachel came to stand beside him, and for a while neither of them spoke. Then she said, quietly, so only he could hear, "It knows you." He didn't ask what she meant. Yes. Why? He turned to look at her. In the forest dark, with no moon and only the cold blue luminescence of ancient bioluminescent moss to see by, his eyes were the color of smoke and deep water, and something she had no word for. "Because I spent 3 years letting it," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She should press. She always pressed. It was, in fact, her most reliable professional skill. But the bond was very loud right now, almost audible, a deep harmonic that lived just below hearing, and she found that some part of her was not, for the first time in a long time, reaching for the next question. She reached instead for his arm. Just a touch, quick, brief, the kind of contact that could be explained as steadying in the dark. He went very still. "Whatever you're carrying," she said, "you don't have to carry it alone. Not here." She felt him breathe. Just once, deep and careful. Like a man who had been holding something underwater for a very long time and had briefly, just briefly, let it surface. "You'd feel differently," he said, "if you knew what I was carrying." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I'm a better judge of people than you're giving me credit for." A pause. Then, very quietly, "You might be the best I've ever met." She removed her hand, squared her shoulders, looked at the darkness ahead. "Keep moving," she said. "We're not through yet." But the warmth in her chest was spreading now, and she stopped trying to blame it on Stu. Chapter 4. The Broken Crown and the Burning Truth. They reached the ironwood shelf without casualties, which Rachel declared a victory, and which Pip declared mathematically unprecedented given the variables, which was Pip's way of saying miracle. The first week was consumed with establishment, tunnels mapped, perimeter set, supply lines rerouted with the help of 3 sympathetic merchants who'd been waiting for exactly this kind of relocation to escalate their involvement. The forest rebels were, if anything, better positioned in the ironwood than they'd been in Ashvin. The shelf's natural geography did half the defensive work that had taken them years to build by hand. Gray threw himself into the work with a totality that Rachel recognized as avoidance, because she had done the same thing for 3 years and knew exactly what it looked like from the outside. She said nothing. Yet, on the 8th day, the raven found them. Not a natural raven, a messenger bird of the Ashbale Syndicate, marked with Cain's seal, which should have been impossible since no one had that address. It arrived at dawn, and when Rachel read the message attached to its leg, she read it 3 times before she was certain she'd understood it. "We know what you shelter. Hand him over by the next full moon, or we burn every Omega settlement from the Thornwall to the coast. Every one. Him. Not her. Not the rebels. Him." She folded the message. She sat with it for 1 full hour, alone in the command space, while the camp moved around her with its ordinary morning sounds. She sat with the weight of it, what it meant, what it confirmed, what it demanded she do next, and she let herself be angry and afraid, and then, finally, clear. She went to find Gray. He was at the forest edge again. Of course he was. "Tell me who you are," she said. Not a question. "Actually tell me." He turned. He saw the folded message in her hand. Something in his face moved, a long, slow rearrangement, like a wall deciding to finally come down. "Rachel. They're threatening Omega settlements," she said. "Dozens of them. All of them, Thornwall to coast. For you. Not for me. Not for the rebellion. For the specific person I'm sheltering." She unfolded the message and held it up. "So I need you to tell me who you are. Right now. Because if you're worth that many lives, I need to know." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "My name is George." The forest went absolutely quiet. "George Aldrich Vane," he continued. "Alpha King of Valdenmoor. Deposed. Exiled. Declared dead." A pause. "Not actually dead. As you can see." She stared at him. He waited. The silence stretched between them like the moment before something breaks. You, she said. And the word contained everything, all the nights her mother's village burned, all the years of Omega suppression, all the miles she'd run from a system that a king had presided over and perpetuated, all the fury she'd built into something as fragile and fierce as a rebellion. I know, he said quietly. You sat on a throne. I did. While Cain dismantled. While I was blind, he said. Not absent. Blind. Which is worse. I know it's worse. She turned away from him. She needed to not look at his face, because his face was honest, and honesty right now was a weapon she didn't know how to deflect. The bond, she said. Her voice was strange. You knew. From the first night. And you let me, she stopped. You let me trust you. Yes. And I let myself trust you. He moved one step, stopping when she didn't turn. I didn't plan it. I didn't come here intending to deceive you. I came here because the forest pushed me out and you were there, and he paused. I was so tired. She turned back, because she had to see his face for this part. He looked exhausted. Not physically, the man who had walked them through the forbidden forest and built walls in the night and trained her fighters to survive was not physically diminished. But the exhaustion behind his eyes was the kind that sleep doesn't touch. The exhaustion of a man who had been wrong in a way that cost others, and had not stopped knowing it for a single day since. What do you want from us? She said. The crown is in 17 pieces, he said. Cain broke it at the coup to prevent it bonding again. But it can be reassembled. The fragments can be found by a bloodbond king. He held her gaze. By a bloodbond pair. Alpha and Omega both. The crown was forged by the first wolf for that purpose. It requires both energies to restore. Which is why Cain has been hunting the Omega bloodlines. Not for tax revenue. To prevent the restoration. The full shape of it hit her like cold water. Not random oppression. Targeted erasure. Every Omega community destroyed, every Omega leader arrested, every Omega bloodline traced and tracked and systematically broken, because Cain had read the same histories she hadn't had access to, and he knew what a true bonded Alpha-Omega pair could do. He'd been hunting the other half of the crown's restoration the entire time. He'd been hunting her. The bond, she said again. It's not an accident. No, he said. I don't think it is. She looked at him, this man who was simultaneously a king she had every reason to hate and a person she had spent weeks learning to trust, and who was looking at her now with the specific helplessness of someone who has been entirely honest for the first time in a very long time and has no idea what comes next. The Raven's message was still in her hand. Omega settlements. Thornwall to coast. Her people. If we restore the crown, she said slowly, Cain loses the source of his authority. Without the true crown, the High Elders can't legitimize his claim. Yes. And the Alpha-Omega pairing. Reshapes the hierarchy, he said. A king bonded to an Omega leader. It doesn't just restore the crown, it changes what the crown means. What the throne looks like. He paused. If you want it to. She almost said, I don't want a throne. She had meant to say it for years, that she was fighting the system, not for control of it. But standing here with 17 shattered crown fragments between them and an enemy who had spent years systematically erasing her people to prevent this exact moment, she understood suddenly that sometimes the only way to burn a system down is to sit in its chair and rebuild it from the top. You would need to be queen, he said quietly. In any meaningful sense. Not consort. Not symbolic. Equal authority, different domains. It was always supposed to work that way, the histories Cain had destroyed said so. Alpha strength and Omega wisdom. Two halves. How convenient, she said, that the king who needs an army is telling the rebel leader she'd be a queen. I know how it sounds. It sounds like exactly the kind of thing a desperate deposed monarch would say. Yes. He didn't flinch. And I'm saying it anyway, because it's true, and because lying to you again isn't something I'm capable of. He took a breath. I have been everything you think I am. I have been blind and complicit by blindness, and I cannot give you back what was lost while I looked the other way. But I can give you what comes next. If you'll take it. If you'll trust me with one more decision. The bond was very loud. The forest was very quiet. Bryn appeared at the edge of the trees, and Rachel could tell from 40 meters away that something had happened. Kane's army, Bryn said. Advanced units. Ironwood's northern approach. They found us. And there it was. The first climax and the final choice, arriving together the way disasters always do, without the decency of spacing themselves out. Rachel looked at Bryn. At the camp behind her, the people she'd built this from nothing with. At Gray, at George, standing at the forest edge with the weight of a broken crown and 3 years of survival and something terrifyingly close to hope in his winter-gray eyes. She turned to Bryn. How long, she said. 2 hours. Maybe 3. She nodded. Turned back to the man who was, apparently, her fated mate, her political complication, and the key to either saving or destroying everything she'd spent 3 years building. 3 hours, she said to him. Tell me everything about the crown. Where the pieces are. How the restoration works. Everything. She held out her hand, the one without the message, the one that wasn't shaking. And then we go to war. He looked at her hand. At her face. At the hand again. He took it. The bond didn't flare. It settled. Like a fire that has been burning cold and scattered, finally finding its hearth, a deep, resonant warmth that moved through her bones and his simultaneously, and in the oldest part of the forbidden forest, unseen by anything except the trees and the ancient intelligence that lived among them, one of the 17 crown fragments began, for the first time in 3 years, to glow. Then she pulled him toward the command tent, because they had 2 hours and a war to plan, and the universe's romantic timing was, as always, appalling. Behind them a raven circled once, then flew north, toward the capital, toward Kane, carrying nothing. But Kane would know. The same way every wolf in the kingdom had felt the crown shatter, he would feel this. The first fragment awakening. The bond completing. He would know the dead king had found the other half of his power. And he would be afraid. Which, the forest might have said, if forest spoke, is exactly where we want him. The crown is not yet whole. The war has not yet begun. But the dead king has risen, the rebel queen has chosen, and Voldemort will never be the same. Some thrones are taken. Some are earned. And some, the truest kind, are rebuilt, piece by broken piece, by the people brave enough to believe they deserve better. End of Volume 1. Open Book. The Forest Rebels and the Broken Crown continues in Volume 2, The 17 Pieces.